And now, here comes a bit of an interesting thing. So, to try and finish up this season quickly, I will try and combine some of the remaining races into one bigger video to help speed things along, and so that way I personally can also get on to season 2 and see how things go are, because oh boy, there's quite a few things I want to do with this save, but haven't been able to due to needing to finish this first and not get too far ahead. So, with that out of the way, uh, yeah, this will be an interesting thing to see how this plays out. Also, as a side note, this along with the two episodes earlier have came out on the first of 2026. So obviously, Happy New Year, and hopefully that things will go well for everybody who listens to this. Anyways, getting back on topic, I will try and rapid fire through as many of these races as I can for this episode. Will I make it to the end of the season, or will I not? It depends on how well things go with this. So, future me, take it away then, I guess. What will end up being 4 races, to answer past me on that one, is Ardennes. As you can see with the grid, Vidal ended up qualifying a brilliant 4th, Blanc an impressive 6th, Pratchett Matias sneaking his Catorce Corsa up into the top 10, Siri Lumbus 8th, Esmer Ribeiro 9th, which would help the Valentine to get in, and Jeremy Woodford in the top 10 as well. As the rest of the grid scrolls through, including seeing Surikov and Holt out in row 7, the qualifying was affected by quite a lot of rain, and with the long lap times, it made the track quite difficult for anybody to get a clean lap in, let alone time it right. As Sharp found out to her peril, falling down to 17th, Vasquez being 19th, Wexler 21st on the grid, as well, and the Flying Rick de Graaf being dead last on the field. So, that was a quick summary of qualifying. Onto the race. With Sarian and Lebanon on the front row and a mixed up grid everywhere, and it being rain, and it being an intermediate start, the race got underway to quite a bit of a clean start, ironically enough, compared to previous wet starts at Ardennes. With everybody getting away fairly cleanly in the midfield, with several side-by-side moments going up the hill and through the spray, but everybody made it through fairly cleanly to start the lap at least. Until they didn't, with Vasquez and Olivier colliding in the midfield and getting some damage. Vasquez with a spin, Olivier with damage, a puncture to one of the Katanos, and Surikov also, and Sharp had a spin of her own, and quite a bit of chaos happened in general in the midfield. The main victims being Sharp with damage and a spin, a puncture on Oliveira, Sharp crashing out in the middle sector, Wexler making contact with North, taking out North's tire, and Wexler getting away scot-free, and both Katanas just being in the wars. Although Kofi Koro somehow managed to matrix dodge his way through everything and be perfectly fine. Although he did have a spin and lost quite a bit of time at the end of lap 1, which didn't help matters for him. Holtz made up ground at the end of lap 1, having climbed her way back up into 11th. Wexler was up into 15th from near the back of the grid. Olivier was given a penalty for her shenanigans on lap 1 as well, and the walking wounded came into the pit lane, or at least those that were left came into the pit lane. And as it also turns out, Cora hadn't gotten away scot-free, as he had front wing damage, which he pitted to fix at the end of lap 1 as well. So, quite a bit of a hectic start where six cars were involved in incidents. Only one of them, Dieter Wexler, getting away scot-free in all this, whereas the rest of the mixed-up field began making their way through the wet and damp forest of the Ardennes. Holtzen was on a bit of a comeback drive, climbing her way up into 6th place, up by lap 6, which became 5th when Iker Vidal spun and dropped down to 11th in the melee. Wexler was already back up in the points, up in 9th. Siri Lumbus and Natia weren't minding things at all, as they were still holding on to the points for the time being. until Nilo Sarian, the race leader, was out with a mechanical failure. His gearbox had decided to give up the ghost, and Nilo Sarian's bad luck continued, with him being knocked out of the race, out of a potential win as well. Truly frustrating for the Rossini driver, but it would make Wexler's title hopes a little bit easier, as now Rossini would absolutely be focusing on him and not Sarian going forward. A shame too for Sarian though. Ardennes is one of his best tracks. Moving moving on though. Lap 16, Alejandro Moreno buried his sword in the grass in the middle sector, and he was out of the race as as the field began going through the pit stops to put on fresh intermediates as their first set couldn't make it to a dry line. Vidal found out to his horror what happens when your tires are worn and you go offline coming through the third sector, running wide and making a mistake. Up at the front, though, there was a bit of a change. Lipinen had gotten ahead in the pit stop sequence, moving up into first place. Chapman being brought down to second place. Wexler was up into third, having disposed of Holtz down to fourth. With Schmidt up into fifth, Lundqvist still running seventh, and Blanc ninth, with Flores up into a surprising 10th, having not scored a point yet this season. So it was turning out to be quite a strategic race, but with the dry tires coming on just at the midway point of the race, strategy would become a key factor as Lipinen got out ahead of everybody else still in the lead. Although he was on the soft tires, Chapman was on the medium tires along with teammate Holtz, looking to go to the end of the race without stopping again. It would be a long stint, but it was possible. Siri Lundqvist also did the same thing, along with Lucia Flores in 10th, who also wanted to try the same strategy to see if it would pay off. Edgar Vidal, who pitted earlier, managed to get the jump on Prachapatia, but was stuck behind the two Asia Roads, who were running 11th and 12th in formation. Further ahead though, and quite a few laps later, as the soft tires finally began to fade, Chapman managed to muscle his way through in the middle of lap 39, past Dieter Wexler, and take second place, as his medium tires were fine, whereas the soft tires on Lipinen and Wexler were finally starting to go. It was turning into a good call for the Steinman team, as Wexler pitted with 13 laps to go for a new set of tires. Soon everybody else would probably have to follow his lead. Lipinen still continued to lead, though, for the time being, until he pitted at the end of lap 42 for a new set of tires as well to go to the end. Could he or Wexler catch Chapman and Holtz, though, to try and deny them a 1-2 finish would be interesting, though. It would, with Wexler coming out 7.5 seconds behind Holtz, and Lipinen another 4 seconds behind Wexler on the super soft tire, though. So that would be interesting to see if that gamble would pay off for those two. With 26 seconds and just over 10 laps, it would be hard fought battle, and Lipinen was up for it, immediately going on the attack against Dieter Wexler once he got his tires up to temperature and began charging after the Rossini driver. But could Aki do anything about Wexler and make any inroads on Holtz for second? As lap traffic came into the mix eventually Lipinen got it, getting around the outside, going up the hill into the middle sector chicane at the top of the hill, moving up into second place as Holtz's tires fell off a cliff in the dying laps, dropping her down to fourth, and Lipinen up into second with Wexler third. Maria Gonzalez had quietly snuck her way up into the points in ninth, with both of the Rosado Corsas up in the points for the time being at least, with Flores 8th and De Graaf 10th, until Samuel Blanc blew by with his Lamborghini Power versus the Maserati Power up into 10th place to put Thornton in the points for the first time in a while. And coming onto the final lap, it looked like it was all over bar the shouting. Chapman's gamble on the medium tire paid off as it was able to go the distance, and he looked set to win the race. It also was a beneficial tire for Cyril Lundqvist and Lucia Flores. The latter, both of them looking to finally put points on the board for their respective teams. And in Cyril Lundqvist's case, a big points haul for Valan, who desperately needed the points. But through the final corner, Chapman would cross the line, still plenty of time to spare ahead of Aki Lipinen to get Windsor's first podium of the season. Dieter Wachsler would finish third, losing some ground to his title rival. Holtz fourth after a good effort, but a disappointing result at the end of the day, given that she could have won it. Surikov would come through to finish fifth, a whopping 35 seconds behind Holtz. Schmidt would take sixth. Cyril Lundqvist finally getting Valan on the board with points in seventh. Maureen Gonzalez stealing eighth off of Flores in the final hairpin to get eighth. Flores would come home ninth to get her first points of the season in ninth, and 10th would go to Samuel Blanc to give Thornton their second point of the season, leaving them only 1 point behind Asia Road Racing as things standed. So it was a fairly interesting race of tactics. Lipinen almost winning the race. Had he had just a little bit more time, he might have been able to win it. And several other drivers finally getting on the points board for the first time this season. And now Catorce Corsa had the pressure on them to finally score points, as they were the only team without points going into the second half of the season. Only a few cars DNF'd the race, and most of them finished on the lead lap. The only one not being Kofi Coro in the other Catorce car, finishing a lap down after his incidents at the start of the race. So with that race down, the championship also closed up a little bit. Chapman closing up to 10 points behind Wexler, moving ahead of Sarian, who dropped down to third. Holtz getting ahead of Sharp up into fourth. Wolfgang Schmidt taking ninth in the standings, and Cyril Lundqvist jumping up into 15th in the standings with her points haul, and Flores also finally getting off the board. So, with the Ardennes done, it was on to the next round, which was in another power circuit. This time it was in Milan, which had yet another wet-dry qualifying session that led to a very interesting grid. With Wexler on pole, to the delight of the Rossini faithful, Van Dorn's Wolfgang Schmidt second, Iker Vidal third, Sharp and Chapman on row 3, row 4 had Surikov and Sarian, Holtz was only 9th, De Graaf snuck into the top 10 again, Blanc was 11th, with Vasquez alongside in 12th, Gonzalez 13th, with Lipinen 14th, the two Asia roads locking down row 8 yet again, Lundqvist and Flores, the Ardennes heroes, on the same row. Woodford a depressing 20th again. Moreno down to 21st, with the two Catorces 22nd and 24th at their home race. Not a good look for them, and doubly so given they need points. With the race looking to be dry and it being a speed circuit, it will be interesting to see what happened in Milan as the lights went out and the front row got away brilliantly, but Vidal got an even better start, moving up into second place. Nina Holtz took her poor qualifying position, promptly threw it in the dumpster and in the kitty later, dropping all the way down to the last, having made a mistake in turn 1 and gone off the road. But it was Wexler ahead of the Windsor, ahead of Iker Vidal, ahead of the Van Dort, ahead of Chapman, who was charging through the field, making a brilliant move around the outside up into fourth place past Wolfgang Schmidt already, who was already down to fifth. So much for that front row start for Schmidt. Lucia Flores' bad day got worse, as not only did she make the same mistake Holtz did into turn 1, she had also been busted for jumping the start and received a drive-through penalty for her punishment. Flores going from the highest of highs of finally scoring points to the lowest of lows with a poor qualifying, a mistake, and a drive-through. The race then settled down into a rhythm and a bit of a slipstream battle. Wexler and Chapman clearly the faster drivers on track at the moment, and were slipstreaming each other, swapping the lead back and forth for almost every other lap. As Sharp lurked about a couple seconds back with Lipinen and Sarin in tow behind her, as she tried to see if she could make ground on the front too to try and take the win off of them. Surikov had dropped down to 5th. Schmidt was down to 9th after his great qualifying heroics, and Blanc was up in the points for the time being in 8th. The pit stop cycle led to some interesting things, as Sharp managed to jump Wexler for the race lead. Prachavatia found out the hard way what happens when you stay out too long on a set of saws, as he got the doors blown off of him by 5 cars in 2 corners. But Sharp was flying. Though, already well within the pit stop window of Chapman. No matter what he did, Sharp was flying and was looking to try and see if she could redeem herself after having quite a few bad races of mechanical DNS, not of her making. She had a couple seconds gap on Wexler, which would hopefully prove helpful for her, as Chapman came in as Lipinen was the leader, having started on sauce that were slightly fresher than Chapman's and being able to stay out a little bit longer. Chapman came out of the pit lane, but was annoyingly behind Wexler, who made a second stop on lap 34 as Nina Holtz drove off the road in protest, unable to do anything to stop Wexler's progress in the field. As the race had settled down into even more of a rhythm, as everybody was just trying to stay in the toe of whoever was in front and not let whoever was behind them past as the race settled down. A surprising change for how Milan races normally went. Both of the Panthers were leading on lap 34 at the end of lap 34 until when Sharp came into the pit lane for her final stop. Could she pull a blinder and try and take the win away? She was still ahead of Chapman, who pitted on the same lap, and was still making a great effort to make a charge. Prachavatia became the first retirement of the race, almost 40 laps in, with a rear wing failure, knocking him out. Chapman was under pressure though, with Aki Lipinen and Nilo Saarinen right behind him as he was running third. Wexler was first, having jumped Sharp in the pit stop cycle, although Sharp was closing quickly. And Saarinen, Lipinen, and Chapman began dueling amongst themselves and the lap car Jeremy Woodford for third place, the final podium, with Holtz a depressing 12 seconds behind this battle, and then Surikov another 10 seconds behind that. With Vidal and DeGraff off screen having a private battle for the final points in 9th and 10th. But coming to 3 to go with fresher tires and the bit between her teeth, Sharp managed to outmotor Wexler in the Rossini at home to take the lead of the race to the stunned silence of the Italian crowd, who then immediately got back up on their feet when they realized that Saarinen could still get a podium in third, going 3 wide through the middle with down the straight with Aki and Chapman. He didn't get past Chapman, but he did get by Lipinen that time around, until Lipinen came back and almost made it 3 wide again into the first chicane, with Saarinen finally taking advantage and coming out ahead. And while that was happening and the camera's cutting back to it, Sharp managed to overtake Wexler for good this time, until Wexler used his battery power to try and keep ahead. It didn't work. Sharp still maintained the lead, coming to 2 laps to go. Sharp now all Sharp had to do now was just defend. Which, coming to the final lap, she was still defending, with Wexler right in tow. Meanwhile, a pit stop distance behind, Lippinen was now in third, trying to hold off Sarin and Chapman, who's just simply motored by the Windsor into turn one on the final lap, with Sarin ahead of Chapman. Further ahead, which didn't help Aki's mood at all. Vidal, by the way, did end up winning the battle between him and DeGraff for 10th place, as Wolfgang Schmidt had power past both of them off screen. But coming through the final corners, Wexler was unable to do anything as the lap car of Alejandro Moreno tried to unlap him. Got lapped, then tried to unlap himself, then realized it would mean doing one more lap and let Sharp through again. Sharp ended up winning the Milan Grand Prix to the shock of everybody, taking a brilliant win to show that on her day she still had it. Meanwhile, in a drag race to the line, the Rossini power totaled on the straight, giving Sarin third, just ahead of Chapman, who was fourth, and Lippinen, who was fifth, giving Wexler a few extra points over Chapman in the title race. With Sharp's win, however, Sharp wouldn't care about any of that, though, as she was happy to just score another win in her career. Holtz was an anonymous 6th, Surkov an equally anonymous 7th, Olivier 8th, who was invisible most of the race. 9th was Schmidt, who who at least held on to some points. And Iker Vidal managed to hold on to 10th, showing the cost for cars which still had some decent grunt on the straights. All in all, a fairly dull race, however, as the slipstream battles were somewhat entertaining, but it would have been very hard to commentate all of it. But in the title race, now, Wexler was now ahead of Sarin by 11 points. Chapman down to now 24 points, almost a race win behind Wexler in the standings. Sharp's win moved her up into fourth ahead of Holtz, and nothing else changed in the driver standings, nor in the constructor standings, as everybody stayed in position for the time being. With those results, on to the next race though, which was Phoenix. And to the shock of everybody, Harry Chapman was out. And just like that, his chances of the title had basically gone up in neck spasms. His neck was feeling bad all week after the Milan race, and he was still not cleared to race come time for Phoenix. So the new driver in the main Steinman car was Pascal Becker, car 94. The young German had gone through the Steinman driver development program and was the reserve driver for the Steinman team when Harry Chapman was ruled out of contention with his neck issues. He's still a little bit raw in terms of a talent, but was eager to show what he had, and show what he had. He did, qualifying second, right behind fellow countryman Dieter Wexler. Holtz was second, alongside Sarin for a Steinman Rossini sandwich, with Surkov fifth ahead of Sharp for a change. Both Van Dorts made it into Q3 along with both Windsors, with Samuel Blanc a surprise 11th ahead of Rick DeGraff for a change. Iker Vidal was 13th alongside Moreno, who was in the surprise 14th. Attia and Hammer were on row 8. Cyril Limbus on row 9 alongside Flores again. Kyohisha Bashir was in the other Asia Road racing, still replacing Rick Castley, who was out due to injury, and then Zoe Sharp having a miserable qualifying dead last on the field on merit. Phoenix was known for its hot tempers and even hotter racing, and it got off to a really hot start for Pascal Becker, who jumped into the lead immediately. Until he got a wiggle in turn 1 and drove off the track. So much for that hot start for the young German rookie. There were several other spins in the midfield, however, and quite a lot of contact. Ribeiro hit somebody. Surkov also hit someone. Gonzalez was in the wars. Sharp ran off the road in turn 1, not seen by anybody. Sorry had also gone off the road as well in sympathy of Becker. Sorry and claiming that he had tried to avoid Becker spinning, which ended up not being a spin. And Olivier had also driven up, and Olivier had also made a mistake, also going off the road as well in all the chaos. Marie Gonzalez didn't make it back to the pit lane. Her front wing going underneath her car and sending her off into the kitty litter and out of the race. Surikov came into the pits to repair damage. He had been the one who hit Gonzalez, and as it turned out. And Siri Lundqvist had moved up into the points along with Esteban Ribeiro. Ribeiro, however, had a penalty for his involvement in all the contact on lap 1. Hamron, however, was up in the points and had snuck up there completely unnoticed by everyone else in the field, having moved up into 8th place on the restart, which Wexler took several laps later, and began charging away. With the strategy now shuffled up, it would be interesting to see who could get the advantage with now strategy potentially mixed up between a 1 or a 2 stop. One thing that was mixed up is that Wexler lost the lead almost immediately, dropping down to 2nd place as his cold tires betrayed him, and he lost out on the restart. However, he wouldn't be staying there for long, as he had the faster car, and was just simply going to bide his time and save his tires. Further back, Pascal Becker was making moves to try and make a comeback after his mistake on the opening lap, slowly charging his way through the field. By lap 10, by the end of lap 10, going on to lap 11, he was up into 6th place, having a little bit of duel with Aki Lippinen before German managed to put one over on the Finnish driver. Nina Holtz, however, continued to lead up front. Wolfgang Schmidt was in podium position again, up in 3rd. Come lap 19, the pit stop cycle began. And everybody began getting off their super softs and most of them going for the soft tire, which is the more robust and usable tire for the hot conditions in Phoenix that day. Rick DeGraff, who had started on the soft tires, was benefiting greatly from this, having been able to catch and pass the leaders who were on their old super softs, and was making his way up to the lead of the race. Only for a few seconds until Surikov's Panther power told on the straight, and Surikov took the race lead for the time being. But with Surikov's penalty, he would need to keep his foot down to try and gain ground. As the pit stops kept going, everybody began settling into their usual positions based on their car pace. With Holtz leading, Wexler up into 2nd, Sharp having clawed her way all the way back up into 3rd, until she pitted for her final pit stop at the end of lap 39, along with Holt. And Pascal Becker was up into 4th, Lippinen was up into 5th, and the usual suspects were also in the points. Sinajono Hamron had gone out with a rear wing failure sometimes earlier, and then with 22 laps to go, Kofi Koro suffered the same problem at the same corner, and he was out. As more people pitted for their final stops in the 40s, and Pascal Becker came out 10th, with a little bit more work to do if he wanted to get a good result on his debut. Iker Vidal during all this was trying very hard to keep up with the flying Rick DeGraff to see if he could steal a point. Further ahead, Dieter Wexler on fresh super sauce versus Sharp, who was on sauce, was the main battle along with the two Steinman teammates who were battling for 3rd. Who would be finishing on the podium would be an interesting battle indeed. Sharp did have the track position, but Phoenix is an easy track to pass on, and she knew it, so she was putting the hammer down. Further back though, Becker tried a lazy block on Holtz, but didn't fight it too hard as Holtz neatly overtook her temporary teammate up into third, and Olivier, who was having a decent race up until this point, dropped out with a terminal water leak, knocking her out, and then Javier Vasquez had his suspension go on the same lap, knocking him out of the race. With only a couple laps to go, however, Wexler would not be denied. With one of his nearest title rivals out, he wanted to get maximum points and took the lead off of Sharp, with Holtz following suit a couple laps later, up into second. But Holtz was closing in on Wexler, and Holtz wanted to try and minimize the damage that Chapman would have in the standings until he returned, and also just take the win for herself with Chapman out. So she did. She took the lead off of Wexler, coming to 2 laps to go, neatly passing the Rossini and just simply driving away from Wexler. And so it was. Nina Holtz, of all people, won in Phoenix to quite a bit of a surprise, given the qualifying form. Wexler came home second, Sharp third, Pascal Becker a very credible fourth, given his adventures all race long. Sarin in fifth, Lippin in sixth, Surikov just beating Schmitz in the line for seventh, although Schmidt would finish ahead due to the penalty Surikov got. De Graaf finished 9th, and Samuel Blanc finished 10th to score another point for Thornton, which put Thornton on the exact same amount of points as Asia Road Racing. Edgar Vidal was the only man to do a one-stop in the field and finished 11th, much to his disappointment, but was at least happy that he finished 11th regardless. So, Phoenix turned out to be a bit of a surprise, but Wexler still gained on his nearest rivals, moving to 32 points clear of Chapman, who was still injured, and Sarin 34 points back, who is now down to third. And the team results still remained as is. Rossini still way ahead of everybody else, but now Thornton were now equal on points with Asia Road going into the final race of this video, which was Vancouver, as a part of the North American doubleheader, with Wexler and Becker on the front row yet again. Sharp and Sarin on row two this time, with Holtz and Surikov on row 3. Vasquez and Lippin on row 4. The flying Rick de Graaf got into Q3 again in 9th. Flores showing improvements in herself, qualifying 11th. Kovikoro was a surprise 13th and was hoping that this time could be the time that he scored points. Vidal was 15th, Blanc 16th, Moreno 17th, Bashir still filling in 18th place, North are frustrating in 19th, Jeremy Woodford a disappointing 22nd, Maria Gonzalez a very depressing 23rd with a neck problem of her own, but unlike with Steinman, chose to stay in the car anyways. Race time had almost the exact same issue that happened 2 weeks earlier in Phoenix, with Pascal Becker making a mistake in turn 1 and plummeting down the order as a result. Except this time his partner in crime was Pratchett Batia and also Alejandro Moreno and Lucia Flores and Nila Sarian, who all had similar spins or run wides in the first sector of the race. So that didn't help things at all, but it did help Sharp and Surikov, who were running second and third now. And also helped Sinajon O'Hammond, who was up to 9th in the Asia Road, and Kofi Korov, 12th, who is now up to 12th. As the rest of the field began to try and fight amongst themselves at the end of lap 1. With Wexler leading lap 1, followed by the two Panthers, this time of Holtz, The wins are Pocky Lipinen, followed by Vasquez, and then basically the rest of the field. With surprisingly, nobody actually having damage or having to pit at the end of lap one. Sharp was the first of the major front runners to pit at the end of lap 11 for fresh tires. As she was curious as she was going to try the exact same strategy that won her the race in Milan. Unfortunately, she pitted and came out into a load of traffic, which wouldn't help her strategy at all. Several other drivers had also pitted before her, but she was the first of the front runners to blink. Dear Wexler, however, didn't care. He was on a mission to try and extend his lead to a point that he could win the title early, with his major title rival in Chapman still out for this race and rumored to come back in the next round in Singapore, and Neil Asarian being his teammate. He was on the charge, neatly overtaking Wolfgang Schmidt in the tight twisty first sector to reclaim the lead, with Schmidt having not stopped. Kawahisha Bashir became the first actual DNF of the race on lap 29, having crashed into the infamous wall of champions on lap 29. Then a couple of laps later, Sharp retired from what was looking to be an impressive second place. Sharp banging her hands on the steering wheel in frustration as she slowly drove her car back to the pit lane. Currently, her car jammed in fourth gear. Showed her frustrated and had a very disappointing season. Wexler made a pit stop around the same time, giving Surikov the lead temporarily as Jenny North's Catano engine chose that lap to blow up and retire her from the race in a cloud of smoke. Further back, while all this was going on, Syrian Lovelace was in the points for the time being, until she wasn't, and her lack of pace showed. But Esteban Rivera was up into 11th, and looking to score another point, until Rick DeGraff had something to say about it. Now, with DeGraff stuck behind the Samuel Blanc train. Blanc, unseen by the cameras up until this point, had been running a fairly lonely race and was just simply doing his thing. As Surikov overtook Lipinen for third, right before the cameras finally cut to the Blanc train, and Becker pitted from an anonymous fifth and dropped down the order. Blanc had been just driving his own race, and now with the slightly more powerful Lamborghini engine and a very trimmed out car, he now had a massive train of 5 cars stuck behind him, 4 cars behind him, all trying to steal the final point off of him. Blanc was not the easiest man to pass when he doesn't want you to, though, and the Thornton car was actually a fairly decent car when it was trimmed out, like the Thornton team had done, to make sure Blanc had plenty of speed down the straights at this circuit. It was actually working for the time being, as he had held off people for a while, until he pitted as he saw his right front tire starting to disintegrate, and he came into the pits, dropping him down to 19th and promoting Syrian Lundqvist up into 11th and Rick DeGraff up into the points. Becker, by the way, had also come back from his final pit stop to take fifth off of Wolfgang Schmidt, right before Wexler came across the line after a truly dominant win in what was ironically a fairly dull race to win in Vancouver. And coming up to the line, Sarian just missed out on beating Surikov to the line, giving Surikov his first podium for a while. With Holtz finishing second, Sarian down in fourth, Wexler was very obviously extend his lead even further. Pascal Becker finished a credible sixth in what might be the end of his debutization for Chapman, at least. Lipinen 7th, Vasquez 8th, Olivier finished 9th. De Graaf was 10th, with the two Valens finishing frustratingly out of the points in 11th and 12th. But with that out of the way, and with Chapman having almost to fit a 2-race gap in the standings, it was going to be very hard for anybody to stop him from claiming his 5th title. And in the constructors, Rossini were still well clear of Steinman despite their best efforts, which was making the last quarter of the season very likely to be a red wash.